So this part is going to go through the analysis questions. And these questions tend to be kind of challenging, so I like to use pictures. You are not going to see these pictures on your lab. I have inserted them here so that I can draw and explain things to you. So this one says, during part 1 of this laboratory activity, one group of students followed the directions incorrectly. They poured the starch indicator solution into the cell. So I'm going to do that as I read. Iodine went into the cell and filled the beaker with the starch and glucose solution. So that means the inside was amber and their outside was starch and glucose, and it was white. State how their results would differ from those obtained by students in their class who followed directions correctly. So this is our group of misfits. They didn't follow directions and they did everything backwards. So you need to figure out what would their final state look like, and you need to explain how their results would differ from those who did it correctly. So initially, we started out with starch and glucose inside, and it was white, and we had iodine and amber color outside. And so if you think about what our results look like, you're going to reverse it and explain what their results would end up looking like. This question, it says, some state roads are salted heavily in the winter, creating an environmental problem. Based on observations you made in this laboratory activity, explain how organisms could be harmed by high levels of salt from roadways. And I found this silly comic. There's some snails driving in a car. I hope you've never done this before, but I've heard of placing salt on snails and they kind of fizz and bubble and it kills them, which is awful. And the reason is because water diffuses out of their cells and they dehydrate essentially. So this question is asking about, let's say the whole car is going to be our cell from an organism. Okay, so we're going to make them 97% water. And the outside where it's salty is going to be super salty. So we're going to say maybe it's only 20% water. So I want you to think about which way is water going to go. Typically, water goes from high to low concentration. So in this case, it's going to leave the snails or the organisms, based on this question, it's going to leave the organism cells to the environment, and they will essentially dehydrate and die. All right, this question is asking about, I don't know if you've ever been to the hospital and had IV fluids put in your vein, but this is what this is going to relate to. So it says, when a person in the hospital is given fluid intravenously in an IV, the fluid is typically a saline or salt solution with about the same water concentration as human body tissues. Explain how the use of distilled water in place of the saline solution would be expected to upset the patient's homeostasis. And your answer should refer to the process of diffusion. So for here, let me just change my, I think green will work. So here we have a cell. Your cells are normally 97% water. And they're going to give you saline in the vein that is also 97% water. This is an isotonic solution. This is the normal situation. This is good for you, okay? Now they're asking, what happens if, hang on, let me erase that. What happens if they give you distilled water, which is 100% water? Again, water will diffuse from high to low concentration, and it's going to go into the cells. Animal cells, like our red blood cells, do not have a cell wall, so they could potentially burst. And I want you to think about what could happen if your red blood cells burst. What is their job? What do they carry inside of them that's really important for us? If you don't remember, they carry oxygen. So if your red blood cells burst, and they normally are supposed to carry oxygen, then maybe you can explain how will that upset the patient's homeostasis. So make sure you include what happens with the water, which way will it move, and what happens as a result of that. Okay, this one is kind of cool. It says many freshwater one-celled organisms have structures called contractile vacuoles. And actually the picture right here is showing you a contractile vacuole. And these things work like little pumps, and they pump out excess water that diffuses into their cells. I would like you to name the process that causes water to flow into the organisms. There's a process, a name we give to the movement of water. That's what I'm looking for on the line. Then you have to explain why contractile vacuoles would be of little value to one-celled organisms living in the ocean, in salt water. So let me just get rid of that. So normally these guys live in fresh water. Okay, so again, we're going to make the inside of them 97% water. They live in fresh water, and just to make it easy, we're going to say it's 100% water. Okay. And so normally water wants to flow into their cells. And because they don't have a cell wall, they could potentially burst. But cool enough, they have this little contractile vacuole that helps pump excess water back out. All right. The question is now asking, though, what happens if you stick these guys in salt water? So let's say you put them in 80% salt water, or just that's how much water there is. Now, which way is water going to flow? Well, it's going to be going in this direction from high concentration to low concentration. Why don't these organisms need that contractile vacuole? So to answer this, you're going to say contractile vacuoles would be of little value to one-celled organisms living in the ocean because, and then please explain how water is going to move and why they don't need that little pump anymore. Moving on to question 5, going to the movies. So it says popcorn sold at most movie theaters is very salty, causing people to become thirsty and buy soft drinks. Describe in scientific terms why the salty popcorn causes this thirst. You should mention changes in specific body cells in your answer. Well, so the immediate cells you can think of, just based on the picture, are tongue cells. So why don't we use that for our example? And so again, we're going to use our tongue cells are going to have 97% water. And when you're eating popcorn, it mixes with some saliva, but it's going to be really salty. Okay, so we're just going to make it, no, let me change that. We're going to make it really salty. Let's make it 20% water. Okay, really salty. So now think about how water is going to move. It's going to want to leave your tongue cells. And what does that do to your tongue cells, right? If they're losing water, why does it make you thirsty? So think about that to answer your question. Last question. In many animals, glucose rather than starch is transported by the blood through the body to all the cells. Starches in many foods are digested to yield glucose, and that means it's broken down to make glucose, or to turn in from the big structure to the little one. Based on what you learned in the lab activity, explain why the digestion of glucose is necessary. Think about the size. Think about my red beads and the white beads. Okay, starch is a very large molecule, and glucose is pretty small. So think about those qualities as you answer this question. After you've written down all your answers to these questions, I want you to log into Schoology and make sure you type in all your answers so that you can submit these to me as soon as possible. You'll have the rest of the period today, you'll have lab this week, and you will have class period on Wednesday to continue typing and answering all these questions. All right, I'll see you later.